Hello and welcome back. Today will be about Blender. If you don't want to learn how to make a 3D model from scratch, you can go ahead and skip this episode and just download a model online. The easiest file extension to work with for 3D models with Xcode is USDC. But if you want to learn how to create a model from scratch, stick around and you're going to learn how to make the egg model in this video. If you don't have Blender downloaded, you want to go ahead and download it now. It's completely free, and all you do is go to blender.org/download, click the download button, and then when you open it up, it should look something like this. If you have the option to select the file type you want to open, just choose general and it should land you in a scene very similar to this. I'm going to go ahead and delete everything in this scene right now. If you tap on the objects that are in the scene, they should highlight yellow. And the way that you delete these is by using the X key. One thing I'm going to do to make this a little bit easier to see what I'm doing is I'm going to screencast my keys. This is an add-on that I added to make it a little bit easier for you guys to see what I'm doing in the viewport. So now that I've turned that on, I'm going to just drag this until it collapses. Now if I click the camera and tap the X key, and then hit D to delete, it's going to delete that object. And I'm going to do the same for these as well. And now I have an empty scene. I'm going to add a new mesh, and that's called an icosphere. If I tap Add up here, and then Mesh and Icosphere, it's going to drop an object called an icosphere into the center of the scene. If your viewport doesn't look like mine, make sure you're in object mode. So on the top left-hand side here, there are different modes that you can be in. I'm in object mode right now, and I'm going to scroll in with my mouse. If you're doing any kind of 3D modeling, you're going to want to get a mouse. It's almost impossible to do with just a trackpad alone. And I want to look at this model head on. So I'm going to click the X here, or you can use number pad 3. And now with the object selected, I want to go to edit mode. I can drop down and select edit mode, or I can tab into edit mode. I want to make sure that my select mode is on vertex select. That's this button here. And I'm going to select the topmost vertex. And the way that I'm going to create an egg shape is with proportional editing. That's this button here. If I tap proportional editing, when I move this vertex, it's going to change the shape of the model around it. The way that I'm going to move this vertex, when I tap G, it brings me to the grab tool and I've grabbed this vertex. And I don't want to move it on the X or Y axis. I just want to move it on the Z axis. So now if I tap Z, it's going to lock me to the Z axis because I only want to move it up. Now, if I move it up, it doesn't really look like an egg. But if I use my scroll wheel, it's going to change how much proportional editing is going to change the object. So I'm going to scroll up until I'm kind of happy with the shape. This is good for me. What I'm noticing is that there's still a lot of sharp angles to this egg. I'm going to fix that with something called a subdivision surface modifier. To add a modifier, I'm going to go ahead and go back to object mode and then go to the modifier tab, which is this wrench. I'm going to add a modifier and search for subdivision surface. And I'm going to change the levels in the viewport, and now it looks a lot more like an egg. I'm going to apply this subdivision surface modifier, and then I'm going to shade smooth. I'm right-clicking and then tapping shade smooth. And there's our egg. The last thing I want to do to this egg is add a material. This is a totally optional step. And if you wanted to export as it is right now, jump to this timestamp. If you export the egg as it is right now, it's going to look just fine. The level of detail that you can see in an app is pretty minimal anyway. But if you want to add some bump and noise and change the color, stick around, that's what we're going to do next. To change the viewport shading, we're going to click this next little icon up here. And then we want to head over to the shading tab here. So I'm moving the view by tapping this hand icon and then just dragging with my mouse. For this egg, I'm going to add a new material. I'm going to click this new button, and it's going to provide these two nodes for me. We can change the base color of the egg by tapping this white color, and I'm going to make it a little bit warmer, something maybe like that. And while we're at it, let's rename this material to eggshell. Now for the normal here, that's where I want to add that bump. The way that you add nodes is with Shift A, and then I can search for bump. Going to drop this node right here. The way that you navigate in this view is similar to the viewport. If you have a mouse, you would hold down your scroll wheel and then you can move in the viewport that way. I'm going to connect the normals, and then I want to add a noise texture node. Shift A to bring up this menu, and then we can start typing noise and drop this here. When you connect the FAC here to the height, it's going to give you the bump. Now, obviously, the height is way too high. One thing you can start with is by dropping down the strength to something like 0.1, and the noise is still a little too spread apart. We can affect the scale by just dragging the scale up, and then you can start seeing that this noise is looking a lot more like an eggshell texture. Great. I'm happy with that. The last thing we want to do is to bring our egg up in the scene. If we go back to layout, where the X and Y axis meet, that's typically considered like the ground plane. So I want to move this egg up so that it's sitting right on the ground plane. So I selected the egg, and then I can tap into this preset viewpoint, and then with G and Z I can now move this egg so that it sits on top of the ground plane. Last thing is to export this model. I'm going to go to File, Export, and we want to select Universal Scene Description. This is the file extension that works the best with Xcode. It says USDC, but we want USDZ, and we can change it right here. I'm going to name this egg model and save it somewhere you're going to be able to access it. I'm going to put it on my desktop and then find it later. The only thing I'm going to make sure that's selected on the right hand side here is materials, and then I'm going to export USD. Now if I go to my Finder, my desktop, and open up the egg model, I can see my egg in Xcode. We want to export this to SceneKit. There's this button here, export to SceneKit, and I can save it on my desktop, and there we have it. The last thing we want to do is bring this into our Focus Buddy app. So I have my egg model here in Finder, and I'm going to drag and drop this into Focus Buddy, copy files to destination, and finish, and we have the scene included. I hope you learned something today, and I will see you next time.